Art Education in Critical Times. Tonight is our 6th webinar, and we're so excited to welcome an FSU alum, Jessica Barthle. She'll be exploring the question, what happens when we allow students to guide their educational journeys? So in the webinar this evening, Jess will share how she adapted her 3D curriculum for at-home hybrid learning. She's currently a teacher in Leon County at Rickards High School and is balancing both face-to-face and remote learning environments. So tonight she's going to talk to us about how she negotiated teaching a 3D art making course, specifically tab learning environment with students who are at home and face-to-face. So without further ado, I will let Jess take it over.
You got to meet your students where they're at. You can't expect them to know things or be able to perform at a certain level. You kind of take them as they come and then build them up to that point of excellence that we're looking for. So first really big lesson in my career, kind of going throughout that year. Second big lesson is the importance of building student relationships. I look very similar to a high school student, especially 2 years ago, to the point that in my jeans and t-shirt, because we were dealing with clay, my principal that was in the interview thought that I was a student, because you know that happens pretty often when you're a young kid. So I start building relationship with students. I'm like, look, guys, I know that this is a hot mess. I barely know what I'm doing, especially with IB stuff, and things are constantly changing in this classroom, but bear with me. I'm not going to make you do something that's not working. So we build a good rapport. We're like getting things together. We like barely survive IB art submission season, go into second year teaching. So my past classroom was demolished. So then I'm moving my whole classroom, reestablishing everything, second year teaching, finally starting to get in the groove of things, really feeling like I own everything. And then COVID happens and we have to retreat into full digital in the middle of an assignment that we had just started when, again, I teach Title I. My kids don't have art supplies. Like we're talking no colored pencils, no markers, anything. So I'm scrambling out of nowhere, reaching out to like friends and family on Facebook, being like, please help me get some supplies for my kids so we can make art because life is really hard right now and they need this. They need this outlet. So we survive, we make it happen. I stare at my computer sadly for the fourth quarter, missing my students that I never got to say goodbye to, and my heart is broken. And then we get to third year teaching. My previous classroom is again demolished and I have to pack up everything, reestablish my classroom. And then we figure, oh, hey, you're gonna teach simultaneously digital kids and in person, teaching only 3D and IB art. Because that's fine, that's easy, right? Yeah, cool, that works. So I'm getting all my supply packets together. They lost my supply order. I wind up spending like $900 on supplies on Amazon out of pure desperation, in addition to crowdsourcing stuff. I get all the supplies together, like get those out to kids. We're figuring out how to put things in the mail. And then we just start struggle busing through assignments. So we're like trying to build our visual journals. We're trying to get on the same page, figure out how to use Canvas, constantly butting our heads up against the wall, figuring out technology and all of this good stuff. And I'm getting stretched incredibly thin by all of the prep work of trying to create videos, trying to create supply packets, and every single kind of thing that I can make for my kids so that they know what it is we're supposed to be doing. And the further along we get in this process, the more I start to think and question, why is this so difficult? Like, why are my kids really resisting this instruction, these projects that I have laboriously poured my heart and soul into with things that I think that they're going to be interested in based off of what they tell me, but it's like extracting teeth trying to get any assignment from them, right? And I think that this is something that a lot of us can really relate to this year. Getting assignments has been a hot and holy nightmare, even for in-person kids, trying to get them to upload to a digital format. And then the quality of work that we get is usually really kind of sad in some regards. Like you can tell that they rush through it. They're not really thinking or engaging with the material. They're just like, I'm done. I'm burnt out. I just have to get something in because I need a grade. So it got to this point, probably about a month and a half ago, after we did this really big project. I had gotten like elbow deep in paper clay so many times I'd lost count. And we'd spent like 2 months trying to get this project done. So last December, I actually wound up having to take a leave of absence because the stress of trying to teach simultaneously on top of a lot of chronic health issues that were starting to flare up and become an issue in my life had become so extreme that like 5 different doctors are like, girl, take off before you have a breakdown. Like, this is not going to do your students any good. Like, they'll survive without you for a month, but they need you to be happy, healthy, and whole so that you can actually help them rather than just, trying to survive the insanity that is this year. So I did. I missed my kids terribly. They missed me and begged me never to do that again because they did not like the sub that I stuck them with. And we barely got through wrapping up the project that we were trying to complete before I left. So as I was seeing that project fall apart, I stopped for a minute and I was like, okay, guys, we're having to come to Jesus because something isn't working and I am done going to sleep every night wondering what it is that I'm doing wrong. Because we're teachers, that's what we do, right? We think that every time something doesn't go wrong or doesn't go right in the classroom, it's our fault. Because yes, students are students, they're kids, they put things off, don't take things seriously, what have you. But ultimately, it's our job to engage them. It's our job to find out how to reach and meet their needs. So as I was kind of thinking of how to broach this topic with my students, in addition to just kind of checking in with them regularly like I always did, I did another Sarah from student teaching, and I went back to, okay, why am I doing this? I'm really excited about these lessons. I'm excited about what they mean, and my students are engaging with them, but we're still missing like a giant piece of the puzzle of what's making this successful. So back when, we're learning all the different pedagogical styles of like art education and everything, I remember like student choice-based curriculum planning. And, as a first year teacher with 7 preps, I thought that sounded like a good idea, but I also thought that sounded like pure insanity. And I stuck by that second year while trying to give like a few more options, like ask kids for more response and feedback. But I still had no idea what that would actually look like or how I could do that in a way where the students don't feel completely like left without any support. Because again, I'm sure you guys are all familiar. If you say, hey, make whatever you want to make, everybody's going to be like, what? I don't know what I want to make. I don't know what I want for lunch. High schoolers are notoriously indecisive human beings. So I took a step back and I asked myself this question: why do we teach as art teachers what we teach? And I'm curious, before I give my answer, what you guys would answer to that question. So some of you guys have been in this game for a long time. You probably have had to ask yourself this question multiple times and come up with multiple answers. So in trying to figure out the answer to this question, I want you to think specifically for this year, with all of the experiences you have had, positive and negative, with your students in hybrid, simultaneous COVID nightmare teaching, what is your answer to this question? You can type it in the chat, or I don't know if you guys have the option to unmute yourself. Either one's fine.
Can you repeat the question?
So it's this question that's up on the screen. Why do you teach what you teach?
Oh, okay.
I think just sometimes we teach what we're most familiar with, because in years like this, it feels like you just need to survive the year. So we teach what we're most familiar with. So that we can make it
For sure. So you teach something that's familiar, oldie but goodie. It's definitely worked in the past. So let's revisit that same concept. So also think, why do we teach art? So even bigger as well.
In the chat, we have teaching around social issues because art can be a catalyst for change. I teach what I think will interest my students and what I know. So somewhere maybe in between that, trying to bring joy to my students and inspire them.
So a big part of what's kind of coming up as you guys kind of continue typing in your answers and stuff, there's usually this this meeting between trying to meet the needs and interests of our students, making them happy, doing things that make our souls happy, whether that's let's do something familiar that I'm not going to have to, spend 12 hours of my life prepping. Or sometimes it's let's look at the world, the community that we're in as a whole, and let's do something to better that space. So you can start really big with your environment. You can look at like your own experience as a teacher and what you need as an individual, and then also how that extends to your students. Okay. So if you're not familiar with TAB is teaching for artistic behavior. So when I was going to answer this question, again, I'm in the process of trying to start moving towards a curriculum, and especially like an after school program that's based on vocation. So whether that's making art in a studio environment, learning a trade through art, all of these good kind of possibilities, because my students are poor and they need all the help that they can get and getting a leg up in this really competitive career field, whether it's in the arts or not. And, again, in high school, we're an elective credit. The vast majority of the students that we see and reach aren't really concerned about art. They don't really care. They're in here because they have to be. And maybe they occasionally get to do something that they really, really like doing. Like I like playing with clay, or I want to learn how to paint, draw, all of that good stuff. I want to just kind of double check the chat again. Yeah, and also especially teaching 3D, the best joy of this particular class is we really get to blow students' brains on what art can be. Because 9 times out of 10, when a kid gets into an art class, they think art is a painting on a wall. And also they have no idea what 3D means, which is how I usually start my class. I'm like, so we're not learning really how to paint or draw here. We're learning how to build, how to use our hands, and how to create something from start to finish and what that looks like. And then they usually start getting excited because they don't get to be hands-on on things very often. Okay. So in teaching for artistic behavior, we're looking at this core principle of what does it mean to be an artist? What does an artist process look like? What does our problem solving skills contribute to our ability to kind of go into any career really and use these same principles that artists use really successfully in whatever walk of life we're interested in? So I started trying to kind of pare down that information. What does it mean to be an artist? How do artists work and behave in a studio environment, in a production floor, in professional work environments? So say like studio houses for game development and design and things like that. And how does that apply to the lessons that we've been teaching year after year? So again, especially in like art school, we're teaching the same lessons that have been taught literally for hundreds of years, these technical building skills that we stop really questioning why we teach, not why, but how we teach them, and just kind of let it be with the why. We're trying to build the skill, train your brain and hands to think a certain way, but not really think about how we're giving that instruction. We're just kind of regurgitating the same thing that we're used to seeing time and time again. So with all of that in mind, we had the come to Jesus. I put on my serious teacher face and I was like, okay, guys. I was like, why isn't this working? I'm like, I am doing everything that I can for you. I'm like letting you turn in assignments late. I'm trying to find you where you're at and, give you all of the instruction I can possibly provide, but it's not working. And I gave them the opportunity to talk about this in person, but I also do weekly check-ins as a survey in Canvas so that they can tell me a little bit more privately about the things going on in their lives that they're not always comfortable saying in front of their peers. So overall, yes, I am extremely overwhelmed. I'm behind, I'm exhausted, like my family's sick. Sometimes it's, dealing with homelessness in our community and the students not having a place to live or constantly getting moved because their parents are losing their job, they're getting evicted. I have students whose parents are being incarcerated, same with like uncles as well, usually male figures. I have students that have definitely lost people recently this year. So one of the biggest takeaways of this conversation that I had with them is there was a lot of innate trauma and difficulty in processing that trauma in order to be able to focus on the things that we're doing in class. So again, my dad was dying my last year of graduate school, taking 4 classes. So my heart broke for them because I knew exactly where they were coming from. Like over spring break of that year, I couldn't do anything. I was rereading the same, papers and everything and not retaining any information. So if we're not looking at our students as people first that have very specific needs that need to be met, before asking them to engage in, all of this strenuous curriculum and stuff, we're still missing the point. Like you gotta meet Maslow's hierarchy of needs before you can bloom, right? So at that point, I was like, okay, well, if we're really overwhelmed, is it the workload? Is it not having an interest in the project that we're doing, not having enough voice? Like we started to dig a little bit deeper into what the problem was and how I, as their teacher and facilitator, could kind of meet their needs. So one of the biggest things that I got back from them in this survey was they did like the differentiated instruction and doing things that they never had thought that to do before, because most people don't know that paper play exists and stuff like that. But there was still this disconnect in really being interested in the assignment. And they were getting really burnt out by these really long processes and wanted something a little bit shorter, sweeter, that wouldn't be so overwhelming over a long period of time. So I was like, okay, I see you. Here's an idea that I have. I'm like, let's try teaching art this way. And I'm going to give you these specific options. We're going to use this specific framework. Tell me what you think. And they're like, I have no idea what that's going to look like, but sure, let's give it a try. I was like, thanks for the vote of confidence. Let's give this a try. So this is what we came up with. First and foremost, we're reevaluating what the priorities in the classroom are. So as teachers, we're thinking, okay, I got to teach the standards. I got to grade things. I've got to assess. I've got to have like all of the criteria that I need for observations because, this is a job and we do have overhead and things like that. But in the process of trying to meet the needs of all of these things, we start to lose the needs of the student in the process. We start to forget that these are real people with real life issues and circumstances that are making the process of learning in a very difficult and traumatic year harder than they are to begin with. Like half the time my kids don't have reliable access to internet. They're constantly coming on and off calls. And don't even get me started on the Chromebook rollout earlier this year. That was a hot nightmare of a mess. So in trying to balance all of the things that I was responsible for as a teacher, I kept losing sight of the priority and what it should have been the entire time, being like the students' needs and viewing them as the people that they are. Like, obviously we try to keep that in mind, but even the best of us, we forget sometimes, and that's totally okay. One of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten in my experience as a teacher is it's okay to admit that you're wrong. It's okay to admit that something's not working, and it's okay to completely scrap something that you've spent a lot of time working on. Because if it's not working and you force your students into something that's making everybody collectively miserable, nobody's going to benefit from that process. So what we started to shift to, some of this we had been doing, some of this I really started to lean into. So first, I have regular check-ins with my students. So these are surveys that they get. We call them weekly check-ins, even though I don't always have them every single week. But sometimes it's, hey, mental health check. How are you doing? Are you super overwhelmed? Do you need resources? Are you really tired? Because my kids keep falling asleep all the time on me, and that's usually a big red flag for a lot of reasons. Are you really overwhelmed? Is there something that I can help you with? Do you understand the assignment? Those kinds of questions. Then it's also, hey, how are you enjoying this assignment so far? What could we be doing differently? Give me some feedback as baby teacher over here, constantly looking for ways to kind of better the instruction that I'm offering. And I find that giving them like a space to write that information, especially a space that's for a grade, usually helps in getting some good and earnest feedback. They know me well enough at this point that I'm not going to take the things that they say personally or penalize them for it. And I actually get upset with them when they give those really kind of BS answers of, it's fine. I'm like, That means nothing. That's like the worst thing you can say in anything, especially a critique, especially in art class. I'm like, no, I'm not giving you points for that. Try again. And then they start to open up and kind of be real with you. So in addition to that, we start to see a democratic decision-making process. So what that looks like is, okay, here's a bunch of options for the next assignment that we're going to do. So do you want to learn about pop art? Do you want to learn about functional art? Do you want to learn about abstract art? Giving them different movements, different content and things to kind of pick and choose. And then as I go through those surveys, I start tallying and go by the majority most of the time and start to figure out what the next assignment's going to be based off of the student interest from previous surveys. So almost every single one of my students on the past survey that we did said that they wanted to learn about pop art, because probably I had a picture with it that was a giant melting popsicle sculpture that was bright red. So I guess a lot of students are just like, yeah, I like popsicles. That looks fun. Like, and I even asked them today as we were starting that unit, I was like, so why did you guys pick this? And they're like, I barely even remember that check-in. I was like, okay, that's fine. We can just start with this. So they kind of had a voice in figuring out what is it that we're going to learn about, what's the content that interests them, and then what are some techniques that actually sound interesting. So one of my concerns in starting to open up choice for the students was, what's a realistic workload that I can take on? Because if you let them do absolutely anything, that's an absurd amount of checking in with everybody to try to figure out, that they have everything they need. And students have no idea what they're even capable of making, especially in a 3D class where they're not used to any of these techniques. So I was like, okay, based off of student interest surveys, these are 3 techniques that I think are going to work well for this concept that we're exploring, and that most people are going to find something that they actually resonate with and enjoy. So for this project that we're about to go over, that was polymer clay figures, ceramic figures, and clothing alterations, because if you let students paint shoes or let them have the option to paint shoes, they go nuts. With the clothing alteration, I did add the caveat of, please make sure your parent is okay with this, because you might ruin this article of clothing and it might not come out the way you want. That's part of the art process. Don't have a parent come yell at me because of all of this. So we have students involved in the decision-making process, regular check-ins. I'm encouraging them to make mistakes, to try new processes and things. And then as things don't go the way that they plan, because that never happens when you start a project, it never comes out the way you want it to, guiding them through that correction process, being like, it's supposed to look really, really weird right now. That's where you are in the process. It's not supposed to automatically become this super refined work of art that looks like a person. I'm like, it's supposed to look like a blob. It's okay. Just trust the process and we'll get there. And ultimately, the students are designing their own projects, having their own kind of voice in what they want to make, all of that good stuff. So we've got the student centered at the entire kind of, curriculum planning process. Everything that I do, my students are aware of the decisions that are being made, and I'm constantly asking them for feedback. So if they don't give me feedback, I'm like, well, that's on you. You had the option. It's not my fault you didn't do the assignment, so you're going to have to make this work. And then they kind of get that tough love lesson of, well, if I really want to do something that I really want to do, that's not with everything that's being provided, I need to speak up and kind of advocate for myself. So again, what this kind of looks like in putting it to practice, just talk to your kids. Like they're baby adults. They want to be treated like adults. They're so used to teachers telling them that their voice doesn't matter, that they don't know what they're talking about, that their questions are dumb. Like I can't say that this is true for other people's schools, but I see this in Title I quite a bit. Like the students are so kind of beaten into submission that they really don't know how to react to somebody saying, I care about you and I want to know what you think. Like I've had several students at this point come up to me and be like, Miss B, you're my favorite teacher. You want to know why? And I'm like, why? Sure. And they're like, you actually teach us. You don't just hand us a worksheet. And it breaks my heart every time because, again, when you love what you do so much and you put so much work into what you do, you're like, why aren't other people doing this? Why aren't we meeting the needs of these kids? So if they just need to be taught how to use a ruler and aren't necessarily confident in admitting that they don't know how to do this seemingly simple thing, sometimes you have to be willing to intervene on their behalf and say, hey, it's okay that you don't know this. It's my job to help you and to kind of help you reach that standard and that objective that you're looking for. This is the first time you're doing this thing, right? Like the first time that I tried this technique, it turned out into a giant pile of garbage. You benefit from my experience in making a giant pile of garbage and resculpting that mouth like 5 times over the course of 5 days until I get it right. I'm like, that's why it looks so easy when I do this, because I've done it God knows how many times and I failed at doing it even more times. So, kind of reinforcing those ideas that it's okay to fail. This isn't going to come out the way you want it to every single time. And trust the process. Trust me in that process. So, now going on into the fun things, what does this look like in the lesson that I am still currently trying to beg my students to wrap up? Because that's how it works in COVID teaching. You create a timeline, you throw the timeline out the window, and you're like, all right, well, hopefully this is in before the grading period because grades are due. So for this assignment, I decided to do something really broad and really easily accessible to students because we were doing something new for the first time. I was like, let's explore identity because you're teenagers. You don't know who you are at this point in your life. That's completely normal because when you ask teenagers the question, who are you? They look at you like, they really, really don't know. So we went into this whole conversation about what is identity? How is identity performed? How is it different depending on the environment that we're in? All of that good stuff. Like, as teenagers, do you act the same way around your parents as you do around your friends? They're going to turn 5 different shades of red and be like, that ain't going to go well, especially if you bring church into the question. So our objectives for this lesson was, first, we're going to explore what identity is and how it can be performed differently between individuals because we're all unique, although we do have things in common. We're then going to analyze an inspirational artwork. The students were able to choose their inspirational artist, and it didn't have to be a visual artist. And I did start them off with some examples, which we'll go over in a bit. After analyzing that work for content and inspiration, they then drew inspiration from their research and said, I want to collaborate with my inspiration artist in this particular way. And then they took that research and they built a build schematic of what it was that they wanted to build with one of the techniques that they chose. And they were allowed to do a completely different technique from the 3 that I set up for them. I just made it clear, if you're doing something outside of one of these given techniques, you're doing most of the work and figuring out how to make that happen. I will facilitate you as I can, but I am not making a technique page for little old you because you decided to be special. This is where you get to be, a more independent adult and really take ownership of your learning process. So if they wanted to really run with something, especially some of my advanced kids, I gave them the opportunity to do that. And you can kind of see some of the examples of some of the things that they've been working on the slide. So translating that, after we kind of talked about identity for a little bit, and again, how identity looks person to person, individual to individual, culture to culture, we then started looking at inspirational artists. And I tried to pick a diverse range. So a 2D visual artist, a 3D visual artist, and a performing artist that the students I knew already liked. That all dealt with the concept of identity. So I created these little Google slide presentations. They're only 2. And I gave the bio of the artist. And on the second slide, it's got a video analyzing one of the works that they created that really explores this concept of identity. So Frida with Dos Fridas, exploring her indigenous roots and her colonialized roots and how that kind of created conflict within herself. And this being a really good video that kind of overviews like all of the different symbols and everything in this artwork. Felix Gonzalez Torres, who's a queer artist that made art during the AIDS epidemic, mainly about AIDS and his experience before he lost his life to AIDS at kind of the tail end of that epidemic. Whoops. and his really minimalist sculptures. So most of Felix Gonzalez Torres's work, if you're not really familiar with it, is highly conceptual, like giant pile of candy in the side of the room that has a very specific weight that's symbolic. And then as people come and take, candy and weight from that, kind of giving this idea of loss, like you see in a person kind of withering away from AIDS. So briefly touched on that. And then Rod Wave from my hometown in St. Pete, if you're not familiar with him, he's a rapper, kind of up and coming, makes a lot of work about his experience and his truth. And something that's really important to him in his music is making sure that he's not glorifying the glamour lifestyle that we see with a lot of contemporary rappers, but really talking about his experience growing up, who he is, and staying true to himself despite this fame and everything that he's getting. So I let my students pick which work we would go over together as a class, and of course all of them picked Rod Wave. Life lesson: I had not actually listened to the song Hard Times that I chose in full or watched the entire video in full. And I had an observation, and there was profanity in it. Always watch your videos, even when you're behind on things. Always don't make that mistake. I wound up making a learning experience out of it, being like, yeah, so he's talking about, some of this really controversial stuff. And again, he's trying to be true to himself, which is why he's talking about these difficult experience hard truths in a way that's, very specific to him. So trying to turn that on its head and make it a good learning experience. Because again, most of the works that my students chose for this assignment were from rappers, R&B musicians, people talking and, using profanity and other kind of colorful language in their work. So the goal of this research assignment was students were to pick an artwork, name the artist, analyze the work for content. So what does it make them experience, feel, think? And then what do they think that artwork is about? So really kind of learning how to analyze music, both for like rhythm, tempo, things like that, in addition to how do you analyze an artwork for all of that good stuff. So the general flow of how this lesson got put together, kind of after we started to get some of that research and everything, was first, we're going to do a journal assignment exploring identity. So 3 journal techniques, keep it diversified, have fun exploring with your visuals and stuff. Tell me who you are in a visual format. After that, they did their artist research, submitted that to me. We went over it together and talked about potential ways that they could collaborate with that artist on their assignment. And then we went straight into designing their projects. So for a 3D build, that looks like your concept sketches. So if it's fully 3-dimensional in the round, front, side, and back. If it's just a relief project, just the front and the side, so I can see how far it comes out, all that good stuff. They needed to include their supply list, which I'm about to go over how that worked with the digital kids in a moment. And they also had to give an artist statement about how they were showing who they are and kind of tying back to their artist inspiration research with the design of their project. And they really kind of blew me out of the water with this. Like, they went real conceptual with some of the symbols and things that they were choosing to use. Some of them definitely went for, cartoon characters and everything that they identify with, which I said was totally fine. Because some of them are just like, I don't know who I am. What do I make artwork about me? And I'm like, what do you like? What are you passionate about? What do you care about? And they're like, oh, it's like, yeah, that's part of your identity and who you are. Don't overthink it, man. It's fine. And the only parameters that they were given for like assessment and what they had to include with the project was it has to be 3-dimensional in some way. This is a sculpture class, and it has to reflect back on that element of your identity, which we kind of vetted for with that artist statement. So they weren't technically confined to the 3 techniques that I laid out for them and provided specific instruction on. I had some students that decided to do digital work, so 3D rendering. I have some students that are doing resin work, so both like a jewelry piece and one's actually like a little functional sculpture. I have a student that's sewing a cloak for her fursona, which is a big part of a lot of the artwork and stuff that she made, like literally everything under the sun. And again, if the student proposed something that I wasn't going to provide specific instruction for, I was like, okay, these are going to be your first steps. You need to check in with me regularly. And as you come up with questions, shoot me a picture of what you're working on Remind if we're not on the call, and I will help you kind of as we get that stuff together. And what I saw when we actually started building this was I didn't have to do as much work as I thought I was going to have to do, because the students were actually engaged. They're like, hey, I'm figuring out how to make this thing. YouTube exists. All of these tutorials in the world exist. And I, in the actual technique instruction page, which I'll show you an example of in a minute, I showed them like, how do you look for these things? And then they were able to go and find more specific information on their own. So once you kind of give them that framework of this is how we research to figure out how to do the thing, because again, that's what we do as artists all the time. They were like, oh, I can figure out how to make things on my own. Crazy concept. I'm taking ownership of my own learning experience. So right now with most of my kids, we're in step 4, build the thing. We're having daily check-ins. I check in with every single student, every single class, because I have 2 hours and then time to do so. So sometimes I start with the in-person kids first and do a lap, come back to the digital kids. Sometimes I start with the digital kids, go to the in-person kids, and then just circulate throughout the room as, you know, the art teacher does when they're constantly being asked upon for help. So when we wrap this up, they'll submit their projects on a discussion board so everybody can see what they've made. We'll critique each other's work and then have a discussion about how this went and how we can kind of learn from this moving on with this next assignment that we're doing about pop art and kind of questioning why we make art, about what we make art about and what is art. Had some good conversations about that today. So in that first step of the lesson with the journal assignment, I'm still kind of struggling isn't the right word, but troubleshooting teaching journal assignments to kids, because they instinctively want to just draw something really simple on one part of the page. Like, again, we're not a drawing class, so I have to reinforce this is how you create a composition, how you layer things together and experiment with different techniques. So one of the things that I'm building for them right now is a resource page on how to step-by-step make a journal assignment, in addition to having like hyperlink to videos on a slide of all of the different journal techniques that they can kind of choose from. So then on each of those journal assignments, as we go over a new concept, they're able to kind of click through that presentation and kind of, you know, again, like a template, drag and drop until they find what they're looking for. So I gave them this example in their discussion board. I went over, okay, so I put like an environment together that I find really soothing, that I resonate with. I'm a teacher, I'm a sculptor, I'm a bird mom. I've got my little parrot on my shoulder. And I walked them through how I put all of those things together. And then I just kind of let them run. So some students were drawn to like, written pieces. So she like wrote a poem and reflected on them. Some of them focused on like the individual components of their identity and how that kind of came together to create the whole of this is who I am. So again, we talked about identity as a complex thing. How do you act and dress differently around different groups of people? How do you talk to people differently depending on your environment? Like those are all different parts of your identity and who you are. Do you feel like this was a really big one? Do you feel like you hide parts of who you are in front of different groups of people? We see this happen, you know, in the classroom all the time. They're very, very different, and they definitely come out of their shells in different environments. So why do we hide ourselves from different kinds of people, and where do they feel the most themselves? So they submitted their journal assignment to a discussion board, again, so that they could kind of see what each other were making rather than an assignment Dropbox where I'm the only person that sees it, so that they could kind of see the different ideas and again, get to know each other a little bit better in that process. After they wrapped up their journal assignment, we went straight into that research. So on one part or one page of their journal, they identified the work that they were analyzing. They went through, this is what my senses tell me. This is my impression of the work and my understanding. And this is how this work inspires me. This is why I chose this piece in particular. And then on the other page, they gave me some ideas of maybe I'm going to use this line of lyrics. Maybe I'm going to use this slogan, this color palette, this use of symbology, whatever that thing is, in common with their inspiration artist. So I was really blown away by how much depth that I got from this. Because again, if you ever give art students anything written, you don't usually get anything comprehensive. It's like you're begging for a sentence or two. And they really went into depth because, again, they were allowed to choose their artist. So most of them were musicians because that's the main form of art that they ingest on the daily, and they have specific songs and everything that they really resonate with, they listen to on repeat, and that mean a lot to them. So I let them kind of run with that, but I did give them the caveat, you won't be able to use this artist again in the future, because I don't want them using the same people over and over again. We need to have a diverse range of artists that we're kind of exploring. So after going over their artist research, we then put that together in their project proposals. So before going over like, hey, come up with a unique project idea on the fly, I went through and showed them, these are the materials you have to work with. These are the pros and cons of each material and how you can use them to kind of create different kinds of things. So I've been kind of remaking these presentations to be a little bit more comprehensive. So let's see if I can manage a presentation inside of a presentation without it getting too crazy. Presentationception. But yeah, it starts off with like the objectives of the technique. So like, these are the things that we're going to learn how to do in this resource page. Come on, buddy, you can do this. I believe in you. Click. Maybe not. But then it would go through like, okay, so this is what polymer clay is. This is how we use it. This is like the different ways in which you shape polymer clay. This is how you build an armature, which is a whole different resource page. How you put polymer clay onto the armature. Here's a bunch of hyperlinked videos. This is how you sculpt hair and fur. This is how you sculpt a face. This is how you sculpt clothing details. So all of that is embedded into the presentation. So hypothetically, students are able to guide themselves through all of their technique instruction on their own time, which is really useful for the digital kids. And then just kind of come to me with questions as they go. For the in-person kids, do they use this resource? No, because they know if they say, hey, Miss B, I'm going to come over and show them. So this was a resource that I built primarily for my digital students. But when I'm busy, when I'm dealing with a lot of kids and a lot of questions, I tell my kids, go to this resource page, go look for this specific thing, watch this video, and teach yourself, and I will come back and assist you when I'm ready. And they did. And they've started doing that pretty well on their own. And as they learn, like, this is where I can look in YouTube and search for this specific thing, then they start to go even further and look for even more specific detail on their own. Like, I have a student doing tutorials on 3D modeling completely on his own right now, learning how to render his face three-dimensionally. I'm like, bro, I have no idea how to do that. Like, best of luck to you. Keep me updated, but I can't really help you because I don't really know. And he's been doing an awesome job so far. I'm super impressed because he's doing something that I don't even know how to do. So with their build proposals, they had to give me a material list. And again, because most of these techniques are things that they've never done before, I'm like, look, you're not going to know all of the materials you need. I want you to try based off of the technique page. And I'm going to go through your project proposal with you to establish what it is you need, put that supply pack together for you that's individualized student to student, and then you come to school and pick that up. So occasionally, again, Title I transportation issues, occasionally I'll have one or two students that can't come to school, and I might run their project stuff to their house as needed. I just kind of keep them in the loop. I'm like, whatever's going on, if you can't come in or you're having transportation issues, just keep me in the loop so I'm not taking off points for something like timeliness for something that's out of your control. And it's been working pretty well. I think there's only one student that hasn't picked up their supply pack that I need to yell at, but he hasn't been coming on the Zoom calls anyway, so it is what it is. So they came up with their project proposals. We spent a whole day going over those together so students could see and kind of hear about what other students were making, in addition to getting good feedback and stuff from me as well. And that went pretty well, once I could actually get all of the build proposals from them. So then we went to the build it portion of things, which is where we are right now. So our usual day-to-day runs through like, hey, grab your project at the beginning of class. I'm going to check in with you, see where you are. Everybody's at completely different stages of different things. Like, again, redirecting kids to those resource pages as needed, and just checking in with them constantly to make sure that they actually know what they're supposed to be doing. Because again, kids like to think that they don't need help. They need help. And you need to really kind of put your foot down on making sure that they actually engage and ask for that assistance. So part of what I do with them is regular in-process critiques, which are discussion boards where they upload photos of the work that they're doing, and I go over their submission with them, or type in comments if they're having connection issues and can't join the call, so that they're getting prescribed regular feedback. Because if I wasn't doing that with my digital kids, I would never see their work before it gets turned in. And especially with sculpture, that tends to lead to design failures that are easily preventable because they're just unfamiliar with the technique and material. So every day I call on every student that's on the call. Some of them never respond and they get marked absent and stuff. But I'm like, hey, how are you doing? Do you have everything you need? Do you need more supplies? Do you have any questions for me? They'll send me pictures on Remind if they've got like a specific, why does this mouth look weird question? I'm like, because mouths are really hard to sculpt. I'm still struggling with mouths and stuff like that. And then we'll wrap up with that critique at the end. So in terms of assessment, I don't give tests in my class. I don't think they're a good or fair way of evaluating what students learn, especially in an art class. Again, all of the kind of assessment that I do for formative is discussion based, talking individually with the student and going over those process steps of the assignment with them. So, hey, this project is really ambitious. There's a hell of a lot of detail in this. Do you really think you're going to be able to get this done in the time frame that we have? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I know you because you do this every assignment and you're going to wind up hating yourself in 2 weeks. And they're like, I know, but I want to do it anyway. And I'm like, well, this is a life lesson. Let's learn from it. And we kind of go over that repeatedly. So I'm going to be using the same rubric for all of our studio assignments in the future. For their final assignment. And that's going to be 30 points for timeliness. So how did you conduct yourself? Did you put off your project until the very end? Do you have something come up? Et cetera, et cetera. And they will have the opportunity to defend themselves and why they think that they deserve the grade they got on each of these criteria. So craftsmanship is your attention to detail. So does it match the level of detail that you originally anticipated putting in your design? If it doesn't, why doesn't it? Did you have some sort of technical difficulty, for lack of a better term, in that process? Technique is based on the technique that they chose. So how well did you actually manipulate those specific qualities of that material? Did you just make a giant blob of polymer clay and call it a sculpture? Or did you actually go in, make an armature, sculpt it, cure it, paint it, and go through all of those steps? And again, if you're doing something purposefully simple, like a cartoon character, okay, that's fine. But again, that simple detail needs to be clean or otherwise it's distracting. So simple isn't always easier. And then finally, for the heavier weighted section, your tie into concept. So that's giving me an artist statement with their assignment, going over, this is the concept, this is how I executed the concept, and these are how my design choices kind of support all of that. So all of that is a thing. And I wound up talking at you guys more than I intended to and being a little bit less participatory, which happens every once in a while because I was like, I have all of the things that I want to share. So we are nearing the end of our hour, and I definitely want to give you guys some time to ask questions. I'm more than happy to stay on longer as you guys have questions because I've been talking at you for a really long time, and I hope that this has been useful to you. All right. Yeah, Barb, and I've had this conversation with her before as well. She mentioned in the chat that she requires progress photos along the way for feedback and troubleshoot, and that some students just don't turn in those process photos. And that is absolutely true for in-process critiques too. Like that's a pretty big portion of their final grade. And it is definitely a part that they start to fail their grade on. So I drop the lowest in-process critique because I'm like, look, I get it. Life happens every once in a while. You get one freebie the grading period and that's it. And then everything else, I'm like, it is what it is. Unless you're talking to me about why you're not getting this process photo in and you're turning it in late because that discussion board does close, then that goes in as unfortunately a failing grade.
I'm wondering, I love that you asked them to do their own artist research. in my own thinking about how to design lessons. How did students do with the research component? Did you find they moved through it really quickly, or were they thoughtful because they
Really
got to pick?
surprisingly fast. Like I was going to give them 2 class periods, these are long block periods to work on it, and they got done like most of the way through the first assignment. So I know with this upcoming assignment with pop art, it's not going to be as fast because these are things that they're more unfamiliar with. Like they can't really choose a vocal artist for this assignment because it's not a conceptual thing, right? So with something like identity, they immediately knew what they wanted to work with. That was a really easy connection for them. But for things like pop art and the research on that assignment, I definitely anticipate putting like, hey, these are museums and galleries that work specifically with this kind of art, or these are really common artists, just like the presentations that I had earlier, that work with this and try to really emphasize a diverse range of artists. So both like, the forebearers of the pop art movement, because we have to include those in the conversation, but also contemporary pop artists making work that's essentially fan art at this point, and how pop art has kind of been appropriated into fan art and things like that today. So yeah, you kind of have to build it around the actual assignment.
Yeah, cool.
There is a good question. Jess, would you be willing to share? Sorry for the background noise. Would you be willing to share your presentations, the slideshows that you showed students, as well as this one? Are you okay if we share those out?
So this presentation, definitely by all means go for it. In terms of like the like subject specific ones, it gets tricky in how to share that because a lot of the stuff that I make is embedded directly into Canvas. So if you have access to Canvas, I can share that through Commons, and that's an easy way to get access to it. But if you know that there's like a specific technique, like say you're going through the polymer clay presentation that's embedded in this, and you're like, whoa, this is super awesome, I want this. Yeah, just hit me up and I'll send you the Canva link to it, and that'll probably be the easiest way to do it. So like right now, the process pages that I'm working on are like finishing details, how do you paint a sculpture, ceramic basics 101, like hand building, how to build vessels in ceramics, because there's big interest in that, how to paint clothing. And I think there's like 1 or 2 more. But yeah, the only 2 that I have that are like actually finished that I'm happy with are the polymer clay and armature, because those were the most technique heavy, that are the hardest to kind of walk students through individual to individual. So I wanted to make sure that they had those. Everything else is still in the process right now. So yeah, if any of that sounds good to you, I'm more than happy to share. It just doesn't exist.
Will you put your email in the chat and folks can just email you for specific things? Because it sounds like a couple folks might be interested in the Canvas Commons sharing. Yeah.
Take advantage of my obsessive compulsiveness of making things pretty. Yeah.
All
so
right.
full disclosure, it's .net, sorry. Full disclosure, Sarah introduced me to Canva, and it has been a slippery slope downhill ever since, of me redoing literally everything because it's so much prettier. So I completely blame her for that. It is very addictive, but also wonderful.
If you don't, oh my God, I just shared the wrong email again. If you don't have a Canva account, it's great for presentations, and you can get the pro version for free as a teacher.
What?
You just have to put in your information. Yeah.
I
You just
paid
put in
for
your
it.
information. Oh no, you should unsubscribe and get it. You can get it for free.
No.
Because you're a
Okay,
teacher. You just put your school information. Yeah. Okay, well, it is just a few minutes after 8. I really just want to say thank you to everyone. Jess, thank you so much. This was really wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to put this together in the midst of COVID and hybrid teaching and all of that.
Yeah, so, I totally got this presentation done a half an hour before we started, because that's what it needs to
just like teaching.
I know. That's why I'm like, if anybody's gonna understand the kind of last minute nature of putting all of this together, it's gonna be literally everybody on this call. So yeah. Ain't even mad. Everybody gets it. Right. We're all on the same page.
This is far from formal, I think. Well, if anyone has lingering questions, please feel free to email Jess. Remember, it's the .net, since we've both now shared the wrong, it's not the .com, it's the .net address. You also are welcome to get in touch with me. I'll put my email in the chat. And if anyone's interested, as always, in FSU's amazing art ed program, please reach out and I'm happy to answer any questions. All right, thank you so much. Everyone have a really good week. If you're in spring break, enjoy it. If you just left it, I hope you feel a little renewed. The end is in sight. You're all gonna make it. I know it. We can all do it. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a really nice night.